You are now live.
Good morning. I'm Annette Altmans, founder and CEO of the Men Project. Thank you for joining us on this month's training intensive, When Victims React. Is it abuse? Before I go into the topic, I just wanted to let you know that we host these training intensives monthly through Zoom and Facebook Live. And so to stay informed, please subscribe on our website or follow us on social media. And don't hesitate to share with us topics that you'd like to see us cover. We'd love to hear what you have to say, and we'd love to cover it for you. The Men Project is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2016 to educate, equip, and restore all those impacted by abuse. So it can be responders, therapists, faith leaders, survivors, and other nonprofits that are serving marginalized communities. We train them to avoid causing double abuse. And we train them to understand the complexities of abuse, how to identify different types of abuse, and to respond to victims correctly. Double abuse is the secondary harm that often occurs when victims reach out for help. But instead, they're either inadvertently or even sometimes intentionally harmed by those whom the victim places their trust in. Victims, for example, victims are often not believed, or they are judged. They might be critiqued or criticized, given incorrect instructions. They may be interrogated harshly, asked pointed or leading questions, and placing them on the defensive, and even blamed for the abuse. These are all forms of double abuse. So before we get into the topic today, I wanted to share another opportunity for a free training webinar on compassion fatigue, how to avoid burnout and vicarious trauma. You can sign up for this free webinar at the link provided in the chat box. The links are also on our Facebook page for those who are not joining us on Zoom. And the replay of this training will be on YouTube with the link, and it will be available in the description box there as well. Also, we're very excited to launch our first public cohort for our Responding to Abuse training curriculum. It's now available as a new 7-week interactive online course starting September 15th. As the leading curriculum for counselors, pastors, first responders, and friends and family of victims, the Responding to Abuse course will equip you with effective ways to quickly identify psychological abuse and to respond with compassion and care when a survivor of abuse turns to you. So sign up by August 29th and get exclusive access to the interactive online cohort that MEND is hosting. The link to sign up will be also in the chat box. So today we're going to discuss the topic that comes up frequently when we train responders of abuse, and that is reactive abuse. Determining who is telling the truth and what is actually happening within a relationship of two conflicting stories can be very tricky and confusing, especially when abuse is involved. Often when abuse is the cause of the toxic dynamic in the relationship, it can appear that there are two victims or two abusers. But I want to clearly state up front that in most cases, there really is only one victim and one abuser. While the victim may react to the overwhelming injustice being done to them, they are not the abuser. Now, why is that so? Victims may present as over-emotional, unstable, or angry, and may have reacted to the abuse they experienced by what appears to be abusing their partner. Victims of domestic violence do not bring violence upon themselves, nor are they abusive like their partner. Those who are responsible for the abusive dynamics in the relationship have something different than those who are reacting, the victim. They have entrenched faulty beliefs. They have feelings of entitlement. They're managing their image to the public, and they use manipulative and or defensive tactics to maintain power and control. Violence is not equal. Most often, when victims fight back, It is in an effort to stop the control they are experiencing or stop a dangerous situation. Or it can be an involuntary reaction caused by the cumulative or recurring trauma that they've been experiencing for an extended period of time. Their response can come from a place of extreme frustration, fear, even terror, or self-defense. The reason for this is the phenomenon of reactive abuse. Reactive abuse happens when someone who is being emotionally or physically abused lashes out towards their abuser in response to the toxic behavior that's being employed by the abuser to manipulate, control them, or erase their sense of individual personhood. So for example, if their autonomy is being oppressed, if they're being controlled and they aren't allowed to have their own voice and their own points of views, it is traumatizing and it will stir up a reaction. When the victim feels overwhelmed with distress, fear, and powerlessness, they may scream, yell insults, or even physically lash out at their partner, like slapping them across the face or something like that. It's a natural defense when the body senses danger. I'm not saying that hitting or kicking or any of these reactions are healthy and appropriate, but they occur involuntarily when someone is severely traumatized and has been abused, especially over an extended period of time. It's less likely to happen when it's just a one-off experience, but when someone is feeling the long-term effects of being oppressed and traumatized, then this involuntary reaction happens because the body releases a stress hormone so that it can protect itself against danger, known as a stress response or a fight or flight response. When safety or freedom is threatened, the body gets ready to flee or to fight back. The trauma a victim of abuse endures causes severe emotional and physiological harm to them. Emotional abuse significantly confuses victims and raises significantly their stress levels to the point where their mind and body becomes overwhelmed. It's imperative that first responders or anyone responding to a victim of abuse are keenly aware of the relationship between abuse and trauma. So when they are trying to discern who's telling the truth and what is actually occurring, they will value traumatic symptoms as evidentiary information. Trauma's harmful and debilitating effects are why we do the work we do at the MEND Project. Trauma and abuse on the brain signal the body to respond in protective ways. Abuse conditions and actually rewires the brain. Dr. Gwen Irwin, a psychoanalyst, explains that when the brain experiences trauma that is intense, has duration, and is repeated, a new neural pathway is formed. With repetition of that intensity and duration, the new neural pathways significantly deepen, fostering traumatically conditioned responses. When their mind or body is overwhelmed, only limited solutions become available. Excuse me. One of these responses is the individual's mind protectively separates from the overwhelming feelings. And this is called disassociation, which then ends the experience of feeling, or if unable to split their feelings off that way, the individual becomes flooded, all too aware of what is happening and helpless to intervene with either the feeling experience or their own response to it. In each case, based on a number of variables like basic temperament, environmental situation, nurture or neglect, age of the individual, and even gender and or historical life of the person, an experience becomes intolerable when it becomes too much for the mind and body to organize and integrate by a person's now fragmented and distorted thinking. Fragmented thinking can even lead to like temporary amnesia where they have a hard time recalling what just happened. And so it really floods them in a way that is debilitating. When an individual experiences abuse, the trauma that happens is an experience which the victim has no control. They can't stop what the person is saying or doing. And so if they have no control, it leaves the mind and body overwhelmed. In fact, many victims of abuse present with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The ways post-traumatic stress disorder present itself can look like a wide gamut of emotions, ranging from yelling, anger, frustration, extreme fear, even paranoia because they're hypervigilant, and etc. Victims commonly express or display signs of this hypervigilance, which is actually, well, let me say it this way. So often we hear about flashbacks for people who have post-traumatic stress, but most victims of severe trauma are more in tune with what we call a flash forward. This is when the victim carries with them extreme anxiety and anticipatory fear regarding what may happen next that they know will be very traumatizing. So this enhanced sensory sensitivity of hypervigilance increases anxiety and the accompanying responses to trauma. It might seem counterintuitive, but emotional abuse can often be more damaging than physical abuse. Covert emotional abuse are the hidden manipulative tactics that are too confusing for the victim to clearly define, and therefore it's too confusing for them to be able to label properly and confront specifically. So it goes unconfronted. It's just a cycle of meaningless, crazy-making conversation where the victim is blamed or made to be responsible. Covert emotional abuse causes victims to languish in prolonged states of stressful confusion, which are known as trauma states. In contrast, overt forms of abuse, so I said covert emotion abuse, and now I'm saying overt forms of abuse, like hitting, loud name calling, or loud put downs, they can be, not always, but they can be easier for the victim to identify that what they are dealing with is a form of domestic violence, because they can clearly say, if I'm being called back, horrible names or being put down and ridiculed, that is abusive. More victims are able to discern that. But again, I said, not always, depending on how often it occurs and the kind of help that they have. But when abuse is covert, the victim often doesn't recognize their own traumatic symptoms that they're experiencing as a result of the abuse. This is because they probably have not identified their situation as being abusive. They are confused and they are stressed, but they can't find the correct language to understand why. They can't name the abuse. They don't have the clarity that it is abusive. And the longer this continues, the more compromised the victim becomes. Their thinking becomes fragmented. Their ability to communicate effectively becomes compromised and disjointed. They involuntarily shake. They often develop post-traumatic stress disorder, like I just said. And in turn, their endocrine system, because post-traumatic stress affects not only a person in a mental, emotional, psychological way, but it affects them physiologically. So their endocrine system becomes damaged, causing numerous physical ailments that require attention from a physician. Each of these symptoms, whether emotional or physical, primes the victim to becoming more reactive. While the reactive responses are meant to provide protection, they actually are interruptive and prohibitive of healing and can make it more difficult for the victim to secure help from others. So said another way, these reactive symptoms are unpleasant to witness and to come alongside. it's difficult for somebody who's supporting a victim to experience those reactive symptoms, and it's confusing. And so that puts off the person who's supposed to be helping the victim, and that ends up hurting the victim more because they're not experiencing the deep compassion, patience, and understanding that they really need. So please be patient with them if you're walking alongside someone, because your steadfast support and patience can be a true healing balm to their trauma. It will subside the more you stick with that person, and the more patient you are, the more understanding. I mean, you can easily say, I want to hear you, but when you yell, it makes it hard for me to sit with you. I really want to hear what you have to say. So please try to calm yourself and tell me, because I really want to hear everything you have to say. You can set those boundaries, just set them in a gentle way. So these reactive outbursts can also be dangerous to the victim, as the abuser can use these outbursts against them. So let me explain that a little deeper. Often a victim reacts in a lashing out manner. It causes them to be confused. It causes the victim to be confused by their own actions, and concerns them to the point that they may actually wonder if they are the one who is being abusive. So in other words, let me give you an example. I remember years ago in my abusive situation, I was being covertly abused. I was not getting anywhere in trying to resolve a problem, and I was being attacked. And so I would lash out and call my husband a jerk or something like that. And then I felt bad for resorting to that. And I wondered if I was the one who had the problem. Like, why did I say that? Does that make me the culprit in the situation? The victim is confused by their own behavior because it isn't in line with their true character. An abuser relies on this because it makes the victim appear at fault. It makes them appear unstable, maybe, depending on the reaction, delusional, and even mentally ill. The abuser then plays the victim, which is what happened to me. Oh, you called me a jerk. And he would play the victim and places all the responsibility for the conflict on the true victim, which can distort the true victim's viewpoints about who is actually responsible. So where hidden forms of abuse are present that cause the victim to feel crazy, the covert emotional abuse I talked about, it's even more likely to seem that they're the one who is out of sorts and guilty. And if reactive abuse keeps happening as a response to the original abuse, the abuser continually is put in the advantage to shift the blame onto the victim, to keep the victim further oppressed, confused, and isolated, and judged, and placed in the position of holding the responsibility, which the victim has no responsibility for the original abusive behaviors that occurred. So the abuser exploits these responses to gain further power and control over the victim. They are so manipulative, the abuser is, that they can provoke the victim to react in a way that might seem abusive. They know the victim's buttons and they push them to get a reaction, because then they get to play the victim. Reactive abuse takes a toll on the victim mentally. It takes a toll on them emotionally and physically. The victim feels bad about their behavior because it isn't normal for them. They aren't abusive. They don't hurt people. They're often the empathic person in the relationship. They often, victims of abuse often have a tremendous empathy, and they are over functioning. They are working very hard on the relationship, while in return, they're experiencing abusive behaviors. But the victim is not the abusive one. They don't hurt people. They don't have faulty thinking and feelings of entitlement. They have feelings of equity and empathy. But victims can be pushed to the point of being extremely overwhelmed, like we discussed earlier, and drained. They are vulnerable to having extreme reactions. So then why would a victim stay, you may wonder? These relationships have challenging dynamics. The cycle of abuse makes victims prone to trauma bonding. A trauma bond is an attachment with someone who causes them trauma. It is a psychological response to abuse. The relationship starts with showering of love and affection and good times, joy, and various experiences that bring the victim pleasure and happiness. So a bond has already been formed from the start. Then with the cycle of abuse, in the remorse and apology period, there's a promise of hope that the victim clings to. And with each passing cycle, that bond becomes stronger, even to the point where they feel unable to break away or break the bond. The victim longs for the abuser to be the very person to heal their wounds from the relationship and to meet their reasonable needs and demands. So there's a longing that the abuser will actually be the rescuer when the abuser is really the one who is inflicting harm. The cycle of abuse, because I think it's important to go into this, has 4 stages. The first stage is when the tension is building. So we're talking about after the relationship has formed a love bond or joy bond and happiness and whatever you want, however you want to describe that initial phase. Now I'm talking about entering into the cycle of abuse and what that looks like. It includes 4 stages. The first stage is when the tension is building. The tension building phase is a time where the stresses from daily life may cause the abuser to feel ignored because they're usually narcissistic and need to be supplied with adoration, or they might just be annoyed about something. There may be a breakdown in communication during this time, or the stress and pressure expressed by the abuser may cause a victim to feel fearful and want to prevent the violent outbursts. So the victim often goes into, it's very common for the victim to go into, to try to appease the abuser. It's called accommodation. They do whatever they can to accommodate the abuser so that to prevent an outburst. Appease is another traumatic involuntary response. It actually is fight, flight, freeze, and appease. These are the 4 involuntary trauma responses. Or if the victim knows what is coming, the victim may even provoke the abuser in an effort to get it over with. So they just want to speed it up so that that part of the cycle of abuse passes. Regardless, the victim is not at fault for what takes place during this stage. The second stage is when the verbal, emotional, or physical incident of abuse happens, such as anger, arguing, threats, intimidation, and so forth, inflicted by the actual abuser. In the third phase, reconciliation follows the incident of abuse. This is when the abuser may, not always, offer some measure of apology, and they may even offer a sense of guilt or remorse. But usually it's in a very compromised fashion. But regardless, the victim holds on to that and believes that things will change. In contrast, or the abuser may blame the victim and deny the abuse even occurred. So they're gaslighting the victim and they just say that never happened, I never said that. Regardless, during this time, the abuser will eventually, at some point, offer the victim love and affection. Now, this does not always happen. Some cycles of abuse skip certain phases, but in general, this is the pattern. So they'll offer love and affection. They may bring the victim chocolates or tell them how much they love them. Little by little, that love overshadows the abuse, and the victim begins to trust the abuser again, longing for this part of the cycle to remain permanent, wanting the abuser to actually be the rescuer of these traumatic feelings and the pain that is being experienced. But Another contrast is that the abuser may have a very different way of pursuing reconciliation by the use of threats or threats to self-harm in order to gain the survivor's sympathy or stop them from leaving. In all of the above, the victim feels a wide range of emotions during this phase. They may be very confused because it's like a whirlwind of chaos. They may feel disrespected because they're so minimized and ignored and their voice is not valued in any way. They may feel fear about what the future offers or what the immediate situation might bring. They may feel embarrassment, and certainly they feel pain. And the fourth stage enters what is called the calm period. It's the peaceful period, and it's usually when the abuser will agree to something like counseling or ask for forgiveness, etc. But the abuser rarely follows through, and the peaceful stage never lasts. The cycle of abuse can last over a course of months. So it might take months for it to recycle, or it can be so intense that it takes just merely hours for it to recycle. And the more the people within it cycle through, the stronger these trauma bonds become, making it very difficult for the victim to leave. Abusers operate on manipulation and control. We've said that, creating an imbalance of power which causes the victim to feel stuck, as if they can never break free. The victim may even think that the toxic nature of the relationship is their own fault. So most victims of abuse are so confused by the behaviors in each cycle that they don't understand that they are dealing with domestic violence. They haven't seen the power and control wheel that describes the cycle of violence. They haven't seen terms and definitions that we offer on our website that describe these manipulative behaviors. The victim has such a lack of clarity of the issues that they can't, without clarity is the first necessary step to healing. And without clarity of what is actually happening, you can't move to solutions. You can't identify what you need to do as a victim, what to face the steps you may need to take, or behavior changes that you need to make, or the help, the resources that you need to employ to help transition you through and out of abuse. The victim may even feel lost without their abusive partner and not know how to live without the abusive cycle because it becomes so built into the relationship and so built into their psyche. It's not that they are choosing abuse. They simply need professional help in order to break those extremely difficult trauma bonds and begin again. Recognizing that the cause of the toxic dynamics in the relationship is due to abuse, and that these bonds exist in the first step is really critical. There is hope to break them, to break the cycle of abuse and to heal. Now, you may not be able to break the cycle of abuse with that particular partner because it depends a lot on if that partner is willing to face their behaviors, but you can have life after an abusive situation. You can break free, and there are wonderful resources available in most communities. As a responder, your role is critically important. Understanding the complicated dynamics of abuse and being able to quickly decipher who is the victim and who is the abuser will help you avoid causing further harm to the victim. The first interaction that a victim has with a responder, it's a very powerful time. So in other words, the responder carries a lot of power with them in that conversation. They will either set the victim on a course to be empowered. So the power the responder has can either be used to empower the victim and encourage them to set firm boundaries and to get the help they need and so forth. Or it may make matters worse by powering over the victim in some of the ways that I described in double abuse. When a trusted individual responds poorly, even with perhaps good intention, but incorrectly, they risk exacerbating the victim's trauma. And this is called double abuse, like I mentioned before. Many victims have interactions with responders that lead them to not trust someone to help them, or to be afraid that they will experience further harm from anyone they reach out to, when in reality, these are the people whose job it is to protect them. And this is very common. Victims experience double abuse almost uniformly when they are trying to find a safe person that they can confide in. The first people who are responders are often the first call for help, and they may end up being the last, depending on how the interaction goes. And we don't want to see that. We want to learn how to respond well. So according to Break the Silence, an international voice on domestic violence, it takes an average of 50 incidents of abuse before a victim seeks help. 50. Isn't that astounding? To a responder of abuse, that may seem incomprehensible. It may cause a responder to blame the victim, to question the victim, or not want to help. They judge the victim. But these 50 experiences of abuse can be emotional abuse, it can be physical abuse, it can be a wide gamut of things that causes a victim to be so confused. And with the cycle of violence and that love period and that period of calm, it just confuses them even more, because they know that there are some good memories and some loving experiences. So we don't want to judge. So to compound, so the responder may blame the victim, because now they're judging the victim for staying, right? And so it may cause them to blame the victim, to interrogate the victim. Why are you staying? What's wrong with you? Or not want to help them because it just seems like it's hopeless. Like, I can't help somebody who won't help themselves. And to compound that, when a victim reacts in a manner that appears equally or even more abusive, a first responder may be tempted to think that they are both abusing each other. It's vital for a responder to remember, no matter how it looks, there is a cycle of power and control happening that is doing a number on the victim who is oppressed by it. Trauma can be debilitating, and it comes with numerous emotional and physical responses that I've described already. I want to make a note about first responders who are in law enforcement. Some law enforcement officers are experts on domestic violence. Some precincts actually have key people in place, a team of advocates and a key officer who's very in tune with domestic violence, but most do not. So sadly, law enforcement often blames both parties for the conflict. I've heard this numerous times. Many in law enforcement believe that there are two abusers, which automatically minimizes the severity of abuse being employed against the victim, and they may even solely blame the victim. Law enforcement may show up looking for injuries, and it's very possible that the victim has left a mark on the abuser in self-defense, and they are the ones who end up going to jail and labeled the abuser in subsequent family court proceedings. Or perhaps the victim hasn't left a mark, they simply touched in an inappropriate way, like pushed or something, the abuser. The victim may be labeled the abuser or the suspect in terms of how the police reports and documents the interaction. And this dynamic can have serious consequences for the victim and children in the relationship. The victim may lose custody, they may lose right to visitation. The wrong person in the relationship can then be required by the court system they might be mandated to enter a batterer's prevention course rather than the abuser. So the victim becomes re-victimized all over again in numerous ways, which is highly traumatizing. and can exacerbate their post-traumatic stress into what is known as complex post-traumatic stress, a much more difficult form of trauma to heal. So it's very important to get victims to an expert trauma therapist who can really help them, or an expert therapist who really understands abuse, who has had continuing education units on abuse, and can really help the victim identify the resources that they need to heal. If you find yourself in the cycle of abuse, or if you identify as having reacted to the abusive person in your life with reactive abuse, we want to assure you that what you do in order to survive the trauma you have or have experienced is not indicative of who you are. It does not define you. It does not define your character. There is hope for breaking the cycle, and there is hope for healing and self-restoration. Many victims have gone before you, and it can be done with the help of a professional who is an expert, like I said, and I encourage you to reach out to that, reach out to someone. If you have one or two trusted friends or family members who can support you on your journey, or if you take advantage of your local domestic violence agency, you can experience success in breaking free from the cycle of violence. There are personal empowerment classes you can take at your local domestic violence agency. And if you have a friend or two that will not judge you, that will be in support of you and not push you to leave before you're ready to leave, or not push you in any way, but just be a good listener. Take a walk with you once a week, to give you a lengthy phone call once a week, something like that. It can be incredibly helpful. You might not have other people in your corner, but if you just can attach to a couple, one or two, it can be very helpful in your healing process, because victims cannot heal in isolation. It just doesn't work. You need connection and emotional support and love. If you are someone who is walking alongside a victim, I commend you for digging deeper into the complex topic of abuse. These relationships are extremely challenging to understand, and they can be difficult to decipher who is the abuser and who is the victim. An important thing to remember as a responder is that there's many resources available to you to assist you or to refer out to. And I encourage you to make yourself aware of these resources. One is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I also encourage you to become closely acquainted with your local domestic violence agency, like I've said, or shelter, because they offer advocacy classes and all kinds of resources to help you. Familiarize yourself with these resources. Oftentimes, victims are stuck because they simply aren't aware of the resources available to them, or they don't believe that they can devise an escape plan. And so resources are really helpful in your effort to support the victim. There are classes and programs to help victims gain clarity and empowerment, and there are often counselors, advocates, and even legal help. If you are walking alongside someone and you are hearing what may sound like reactive abuse, please don't abandon the victim of abuse. You may be the only person who is in an influential position to help. Please refer to our website, where you will find terms and definitions that describe covert abusive behaviors. These terms and definitions, and you can download them for free in PDF fashion. These terms and definitions can help a victim gain clarity of their situation, because so often victims, like I said before, don't understand that they're in a domestic violence situation. A lot of people don't even realize that emotional abuse is a form of domestic violence. It's not as criminalized as physical violence, but it is recognized by the Centers for Disease Control as being a form of domestic violence, and it's very harmful. So these terms and definitions can help give the emotional language and clarity for the victim to be able to have that aha moment that they are in fact being abused. It's much better to show them terms and definitions and help them come up with that concept, that understanding on their own, rather than confronting them and saying, you're being abused. That can be a difficult reality to set in, and they may even defend their abuser because they're not ready to hear it. So it's a very good tool to download our terms and definitions. Okay, so it's also important when children are involved to share how being a witness to abuse interrupts the brain development for children in the developmental stages of life, ages 0 to 14. And Child Protective Services may step in and hold the victim accountable for not protecting the children from witnessing abuse. Or worse, they may mistake who the perpetrator actually is and blame the victim. At the MEN Project, we advise to not over-confront the victim by being harsh, while at the same time, avoid under-informing a victim of facts they need to know. That's why the terms and definitions are so helpful. And it's important to share with the victim the risks that they face of losing custody of their children if CPS, if somebody reports them for continual arguing or violent behavior. They really have to protect themselves and their children, and that can often be a very strong motivating factor for victims to get the help that they need. So, excuse me one second. Before we wrap up with our question and answer time, I'd like to refer you to our website, where we have various resources that will help you both educate you to identify abuse and equip you to respond. These relationships are very difficult to understand, and our website is full of resources to simplify the complicated nature of emotional abuse. And emotional abuse is present in every form of relational abuse. The only time covert emotional abuse isn't present is on a one-time physical or sexual assault. But if a relationship is involved, it could be parent-child, husband-wife, workplace relationship. If there is abuse involved in any way, covert emotional abuse is present. So you can really learn a lot about that on our website. It helps also, the terms and definitions and resources on our website helps bring clarity to abusers. Now, some of them are very entrenched, and they will just dismiss it, and they will devalue it and say it's not true. They'll criticize the organization and say they're wrong. But those who are willing to self-examine have gleaned a lot of important information out of these tools that helps them recognize that their behaviors are in fact abusive and that they can change. So the other thing that I mentioned is to learn how to respond. To learn how to demonstrate compassion is very specific for victims. In other words, we often think we are being compassionate, but we don't realize that some of our behaviors really aren't received as compassion from the victim. So for example, you may offer advice, but the advice is not asked for. And so the victim feels talked down to. They want to share with you what they're experiencing and have you listen. And so we have what we call our healing model of compassion, which gives you, the responder, very specific things to say and what not to say. And that is available for free on our website. It will define exactly what to do. And if you are interfacing with the abuser, please download our accountability model of courage, which will provide you with action steps for healthy ways to hold the abuser accountable, healthy ways to interact with them so that you don't end up colluding with them or minimizing the necessary consequences that they need to experience. It really defines a healthy way to interface with them. So now as we close, we'd like to take time for any questions you may have. Please feel free to drop them into the chat box at this time or raise your hand and you can ask live.
Thank you, Annette. We do have a number of questions, but first I want to just share an encouragement to you. We're getting some great feedback about just how poignant this presentation is, and that it's just been so excellent. And we had one person send a message stating that as a counselor, this is the only place that this person is finding that is addressing the secondary abuse and the reaction response. And even after doing significant research, that this is the only place that they're finding that this is being addressed. So thank you. This person is thanking you for your work. And so,
Oh,
yeah.
thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you. And thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, such an encouragement. So we really do appreciate that feedback. We do have some questions. I'm going to jump right in. It's already 10:45, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time as well. So we have, the first question is, if both individuals have a background of abuse in their upbringing, is it possible that they're both abusers, that they both could have learned to abuse each other in that relationship?
Definitely, there can be two abusers, but most often they're not. Usually, two abusers don't find themselves together. It's usually an empath, somebody who's very empathic, who the abuser identifies as being the partner that they want because they can power over that person. So it's possible, it happens, particularly in communities, even neighborhoods. I don't want to go on this too long, but oftentimes before responders enter into a situation where there's incest, they might first do an evaluation on the neighborhood to see if it is a problem in that local community, because there are microcultures. And so in some microcultures, there's a lot of violence. And so there, I would say you might see that more often in those situations. But in not extreme cultures where things like this are displaying themselves, you're going to see less of that. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Annette. The second question we have is, at what point do you need to call out or address the victim's abusive responses?
Well, if there's couples therapy, I strongly recommend that you separate the couple and you stop couples therapy, because couples therapy is strictly contraindicated when any form of abuse is present. And to call out the victim's abusive reactions would actually empower, embolden the abuser. And so that's something to work with the victim alone on, because all of the protocols that are recommended for someone who is being severely traumatized is that you must completely and fully align with the victim. Anytime that you create like mutual responsibility, even if it's 80% the abuser and 20% the victim, anytime you focus on mutual responsibility, it downgrades the victim, it abandons the victim, and the focus is removed from the true abuse that is happening, the origin of abuse, I can't think of the word, what is really causing the abuse and the reaction in the relationship. The focus shifts from that, which then makes the victim responsible. So I would never do that in a couples therapy. I would stop couples therapy, find the abuser a qualified abuse or somebody who specializes in narcissistic behaviors, and create a collaborative, have the abuser sign a waiver that will allow the victim to report to the therapist the events that occurred that week, and sign a waiver that will allow the two therapists to be in conversation. But so I don't know if this is that kind. If you are solely counseling a victim that does not have the abuser present, then I think that it is okay to talk about how those traumatic responses are actually causing themselves harm, because it's creating reactions by those around them that will not soothe and comfort them, because people don't respond to that. So I think that it has its appropriate place as long as you have fully aligned with the victim, and the victim is not going, that alignment is fully established, and the victim is not going to feel that you are someone they can't trust, or that you're betraying them, or that they're maybe abandoned by you. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's really good. And it leads right into our next question. Our next question is a little combination of everything we've addressed. And it says, how do we help the victim in this type of situation to heal and reel back in their toxic responses while they're getting healed? It says it seems the toxic responses will actually slow their healing journey. So what do you recommend for a therapist or other responder to do to create that environment for healing?
Well, I would employ multiple modalities. I wouldn't just focus on one modality for helping the one therapeutic modality. I would incorporate EMDR and various other modalities that you're trained in to try to speed along the healing process. And many modalities are effective, but I wouldn't just settle on one. I would try to really bring in all the resources that you can. And I would encourage the victim to read books on healing and a number of other resources. I would employ as many things as possible to speed that process along. Can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I'm answering every component of it.
Sure, absolutely. Let me go back to it. So, how do you help the victim in this type of situation to heal and to reel back in their toxic responses while they're getting healed? It seems the toxic responses will actually slow their healing journey. So, what do you recommend a therapist do?
I just, it can be, if they have complex post-traumatic stress, it can be a really long process. But your steadfast support, you fully aligning with them, is probably the most important aspect of their healing. Having someone they can really trust will be there for them and who understands them and doesn't judge them. So I would be patient, and I would employ, like I said, as many modalities, encourage that. And there's actually wonderful podcasts that are available that talk about narcissistic abuse. And by listening to some of the podcasts available, they can actually receive validation. There's even online groups with some of these podcasts where they can be in groups at a nominal fee and can actually, that experience of being validated by others and having a sense of community can really help them as well. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. And that is it. We got through all of our questions. If there's any other questions that anybody would like to ask by voice, now's the time to do that. Otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap up. I do want to say, if any questions come up at any time after this training intensive today, you can email our team at info@themendproject.com. We're happy to respond to you there. And this training will continue to stay on our Facebook if you'd like to share it with any friends, family, or colleagues.
Yeah, I'd like to add, we answer all of our emails. They don't go ignored, so we really encourage you to reach out and follow us on social medias and see the next trainings that we have. And I really encourage you to sign up for our 7-week responding to abuse training curriculum, because it's so comprehensive. And with each, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to read the curriculum each week. And then we have a 1-hour live session that goes deeper. So it's very comprehensive, and we have extended opportunity for interaction and questions and answers. And we cover a lot of material. So I encourage you to sign up for that. Thank you for being here today. Take good care. Okay, bye-bye.